Hey there, welcome back to my channel where we dive deep into the stories that touch our hearts and lift our spirits. Today we are going to know about God's victim, tale of Alexandrina Maria da Costa, a girl who suffered for the sake of God but found no solace and consolation. Alexandrina was born on 30th March 1904 in Balazar, Portugal. She received her solid Christian education from her mother and her sister Diolinda. She was known for her lively and well-mannered nature, and it made her more likable to everyone. Alexandrina stayed with her family until she turned 7. Then she was sent to Poa da Versim to board with the carpenter's family so she could attend primary school. After returning to her hometown, she worked as a farmer. Her unusual physical strength and stamina enabled her to do long hours of heavy farm work in the fields, thus helping the family's income. When she was 12, Alexandrina became sick with an infection and nearly died. The consequences of this infection would remain with her as she grew up and would become the first sign of what God was asked of her to suffer as a victim soul. Due to the privations of rural life at that time, Alexandrina only assisted school for 18 months and was sent to work in the fields. She was exposed to bad habits and vocabulary from the other workers who worked with her. After 3 years, an employee of the area tried to attack and abuse her. The Lord protected her with the grace of an extraordinary strength that came while she held the Holy Rosary in her hand. After this serious incident, she was returned to home. This opportunity allowed her to renew her love and devotion to the Blessed Sacrament. In that same year, she became ill with typhoid. Her mother would give her the crucifix for her to kiss, and Alexandrina would move her head and murmur, "I want Jesus in the Eucharist." Finally, she recovered her health and was transferred to the hospital in Poa, located in the Atlantic coast. Upon returning to Balazar, her health was poor. She was very weak and virtually paralyzed. So Alexandrina dedicated herself to sewing with her sister Diolinda. When Alexandrina was 14, something happened that left a permanent imprint on her, both physically and spiritually. In 1918, she was in the second floor bedroom of her house with Diolinda and another young friend, when 3 men approached and insisted with a strong voice to allow them to enter. Alexandrina looked out of the window and recognized one of the men, who is the same man who tried to attack her when she was working in the farm. She rapidly closed the door, but the men were able to enter through an emergency door in the roof. Diolinda, another young lady, were able to flee, but Alexandrina was cornered in the room by this man. She screamed, "Jesus, help me!" hitting the man with her rosary. Behind her was a window about 13 feet high. It was the only way out, so she preferred to jump out the window with the possibility of death before consenting to the passions of this man. The fall was so severe and off with much pain. With excruciating pain and grinding her teeth, she crawled her way back into house. Her vertical spine was irreparably injured, and the doctors diagnosed her condition as irreversible. And it was predicted that the paralysis she suffered would only get worse. The pain kept on increasing unceasingly for long years, along with the incapacity and depression, but she never yielded to desperation or weakness. Completely paralyzed on April 14th of 1924, she became bedridden for life at 20 years of age. Alexandrina and her family prayed continually and would say rosary on their knees, lighting 2 candles to the image of Our Lady. Alexandrina would spend her days praying, meditating, asking our Blessed Mother for healing. She would ask Jesus his blessing from heaven and from all the tabernacles in the world. Alexandrina continued to ask the Blessed Mother for the grace of a miraculous healing, promised to become a missionary if she were healed. News of the apparitions of Our Lady of Fatima started to reach the village 200 miles south. Healings and miracles were reported at Fatima. A pilgrimage were organized to go to Fatima from Balazar. Having a great devotion and love to Our Lady, Alexandrina wanted to be completely sure of God's will in her life and in relation to her call to suffering. She asked Our Lady to allow her to go and accompany the pilgrims, but the parish priest and the doctors insisted that the trip would be deadly for her condition, so the pilgrims departed without her. After all the pilgrims left, Alexandrina closed her eyes and started to pray, offering to the Lord the sacrifice of abandonment and desolation. As she prayed, her mind was transported to the Blessed Sacrament in the Church of Saint Eulalia, the one closer to her home. Unexpectedly, she received divine illumination, and she was able to understand that our Lord is also a prisoner in the tabernacle. This unity with Jesus allowed her to visit Him spiritually and to be constantly in His presence, loving Him unceasingly and praying, offering herself in immolation to console His Sacred Heart and to obtain the conversion of sinners. Alexandrina moved to tears and pleaded to the Lord to allow her to suffer to the limit that she could tolerate if this would help the sinners to be delivered from the fires of hell. She was unable to go to Fatima, but the Virgin Mary granted her the grace to understand and live the messages in the most perfect way, intimately uniting herself to the desire of the Blessed Virgin. By offering her passion in this way, Alexandrina became a victim soul for the love of the Eucharist and the consecration to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. She understood her call and embraced her sufferings. In response to the courageous petition, her pain kept on increasing until becoming almost intolerable. Night after night, with very high fever, Alexandrina awoke with her head on her pillow and with the rosary clasped strongly in her hands so as to receive strength from each Hail Mary. With tears, she prayed, exclaiming and repeating the prayer Our Lady had taught her in Fatima. O Jesus, it is because I love you, for conversion of sinners and in reparation for all the offenses to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. The desire to suffer continued to grow in her, the more her vocation became clear. She understood that she was called to open the eyes of others to the effects of sin, inviting them to conversion, and to offer a living witness of Christ's passion, contributing to the redemption of humanity. And so it was that from 3rd October 1938 until 24th March 1942, Alexandrina lived the 3-hour Passion of Jesus every Friday, having received the mystical grace to live in the body and soul Christ's suffering in His final hours. During these 3 hours, her paralysis was overcome and she would relive stations of the cross, her movements and gestures accompanied by excruciating physical and spiritual pain. Alexandrina experienced 180 ecstasies of the Passion, preceded by many hours of fear and horror as midday of Good Friday approached. She said this fear was generally accompanied by intense sadness, nausea, and strong sensation of loneliness. She was also diabolically assaulted and tormented with temptations against the faith and with injuries inflicted on her body. For 7 years, she was unable to forget her first crucifixion. She wrote, "All seemed to be present before me. I felt the fear and horror of those bitter hours, the anxiety of my spiritual director at my side, and my family in tears and horrified." Minutes after midday on October 3rd, 1938, our Lord visited Alexandrina to immerse herself in His Passion. He said, "See, my daughter, Calvary is ready. Do you accept?" Alexandrina courageously accepted. Witnesses held their breath while she was in ecstasy. Even though she was paralyzed, she would recover movement in her body and almost levitated from her bed with the same moments of Jesus in the agony of the Garden of Olives to Calvary. Images of the ecstasy of the Passion were filmed, forming an important part of her beatification process. At the end of one of her ecstasies at 3 p.m., Alexandrina raised her arms in thanksgiving and exhausted in horror, she immediately cried, "No, Jesus, no, Jesus, crucify me, forgive, forgive, forgive. They have the same right as I have. You died on the cross for them, like you did for me. Jesus, I don't want any soul to go to hell. I love you for them. Forgive them, Jesus. Remember me in my crucifixion. Hell is the worst place." A few days later, Alexandrina suffered from a terrible pain. She vomited blood and was tortured by an unquenchable thirst. Water was not enough. She was unable to swallow a drop of water. She stated to perceive the strong odor of sin. She said they were repulsive odors. She related in her autobiography, "Perfumes and violets were brought to me, but I rejected them because I was still tormented by this vile odor. Just to remember these things make me suffer." On 27th March 1942, a new phase began for Alexandrina, which would continue for 13 years and 7 months until her death. One day she heard the voice of God say to her, "You will not be nourished any longer with food from the earth. Your food will be my flesh. Your drink will be my divine blood. Your life will be my life. You receive it from me when I unite my heart to yours. Do not be afraid. You will no longer be crucified like in the past. Now new trials await you that will be the most painful ones. But at the end, I will take you to heaven, and the Blessed Mother will accompany you." On Good Friday 1942, Alexandrina started the total fast, which continued for 13 years until her death. During all this time, she took no food or drink of any kind, but received Holy Communion with great devotion each day. This phenomenon is not unique, as a few saints have received this special calling from God, but such occurrences are extremely rare in the life of the Church. People came in increasing numbers to visit Alexandrina, which added greatly to her sufferings, but she always maintained a cheerful disposition and received everyone most courteously. Her constant silent prayer was, "O Jesus, place on my lips a deceiving smile in which I can hide all the martyrdom of my soul. It is enough that only you know of my endurance." While many thousands came to see Alexandrina and implore her intercession, she was not without her detractors. Some disbelieved that she lived on the Eucharist alone, and rumors were circulated that she was a fraudulent, which caused her and her family further suffering. A medical examination of Alexandrina took place. She accepted in the spirit of obedience and resignation. One of the doctors performing the examination asked her, "Why do you not eat?" She replied, "I do not eat because I cannot. I feel full. I do not need it. However, I have a longing for food." The results of this examination were inconclusive, and so it was suggested that Alexandrina go to a hospital in Porto to have the fast medically certified. She agreed to the proposal on 3 conditions: that she would be able to receive the Holy Eucharist each day, that dear Linda could accompany her, and that she be there only for observational purposes and not to have to undergo any more medical examinations. These conditions were agreed, and Alexandrina went to the hospital in Porto by ambulance, offering up all the sufferings that this journey would inevitably bring. After a very difficult journey, Alexandrina arrived at the hospital on 10th June 1943 and was put under the strictest supervision. 2 people kept her under intense scrutiny around the clock all the time she was in hospital. Alexandrina said that she found Dr. Araujo, the doctor in charge of conducting the observation, to be too strict even to the point of harshness. This increased her suffering and humiliation, but she remembered the words that Jesus himself spoke to her one day, "You will very rarely receive consolation. I warn that while your heart is filled with suffering, on your lips there is a smile." As a result, those who visited or came into contact with Alexandrina always found a woman who, although in apparent physical discomfort, was always outwardly joyful and smiling, transmitting to all a profound peace. Few understood what she was deeply suffering and how real was her interior desolation. Dr. Araujo visited Alexandrina several times each day and interrogated her, and she underwent many other trials and indignities during her stay in hospital. Alexandrina's own physician, Dr. Azevedo, visited her on occasions, and his support and company offered her some relief. After 30 days of being constantly monitored, another physician, disbelieving the genuineness of Alexandrina's fast, insisted that she remain for a further 10 days. On 19th July 1943, the day before she left hospital, all the children of the hospital gathered around Alexandrina's bed, and she prayed with them. Later, over 1,500 people arrived to catch a glimpse of the victim of Balazar, and the police had to be brought in to control the crowd. Dr. Araujo told Alexandrina that the observation was concluded and said In October, I will come to visit you at Balazar, not as a doctor's spy, but as a friend who respects you. Dr. Araju's official report confirmed Alexandrina's fast as scientifically inexplicable. It stated, "It is absolutely certain that during 40 days of being bedridden in hospital, the sick woman did not eat or drink. And we believe such a phenomenon could have happened during the past months, perhaps the past 13 months, leaving us perplexed." While this phenomenon was inexplicable to everyone else, Alexandrina knew the cause of it, for Jesus had already told her, "You are living by the Eucharist alone, because I want to prove to the world the power of the Eucharist and the power of my life in souls." Father Pascal, who stayed close to Alexandrina throughout these years, ordered Alexandrina's sister to keep a diary of her words and her mystical experiences. In 1944, Alexandrina became a member of the Union of Salesian Cooperators and offered her suffering for the salvation of souls and for the sanctification of youth. She kept a lively interest in the poor as well as in the spiritual health of those who sought out her counsel. She would say, "Do not offend Jesus anymore." As a testimony to the mission of which God had called her, Alexandrina desired the following words written on her tombstone: "Sinners, if the dust of my body can be of help to save you, come close, walk over it, kick it around until it disappears, but never sin again. Do not offend Jesus anymore. Sinners, how much I want to tell you, do not risk losing Jesus for all eternity, for he is so good. Enough with sin. Enough with sin. Love Jesus. Love him." On October 13, 1955, Alexandrina died. Her last words were, "I am happy because I am going to heaven."